Yeah, I'm Bill Hamaker, born in Reading, PA in 1934, which makes me 87. Uh, I grew up in the Pennsylvania Dutch area, and I think what got me interested in medicine is the fact that as a kid, we had a family doctor who'd make the house calls for measles, chickenpox, and whatnot. And they always they after he came, people would always say, "Well, isn't he great? Look at that car. Look at the." And they would ask, "Well, what do you want to be when you grow up, little boy?" And I'd say, "Oh, doctor." And they say, "Oh," they laugh. "That's wonderful. You stay with it." And so I did. I was preparing for medicine right up until my senior year of college at the University of Delaware. And I had a chance to get, I got it in my head that I wanted to go to West Point, aside from the fact that it was a free education, not being a lot of means as a child in our family. But it provided me an education without no burden to the family. And I took the exam and passed the officer's candidate school physical and mental exam to get the appointment. And it was only after I went down to Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C., that they heard a heart murmur. I said, "Oh my goodness." And they said, "Well, you're disqualified. We can't get you into West Point." Well, at Walter Reed, they heard a murmur, and it was obviously a functional murmur, but it kept me out of getting an appointment to West Point. So I quickly went back to my original goal, and that was to be a physician. And so I graduated from the University of Delaware and got I was accepted in medical school. And that's another story. Nancy and we got married in '56, and we had a child in 1957. So here I was, a medical student, first year, no income, and trying to provide for a family at that very critical stage of my life. Fortunately, somehow we managed, thanks to getting jobs, for example, in the emergency room, where I gained a lot of experience as as a medical student. I would come in at nights and cover for guys, for residents that trusted me to take care of things. So I got a wonderful education in trauma and emergencies from early on. And then it came time for my senior year, and I thought, man, this isn't going too well. I got a child, another one on the way, working, no income. So I heard about this Army Senior Medical Student Program, and in which you sign up for, become a reserve officer, a second lieutenant. I'll never forget, $222.30 a month, and we were in heaven, my wife and young family. And so that committed me for a year of payback time after entering this plan. The next thing that happened is I graduated, was commissioned a second lieutenant, took an Army internship. All of this is involving or incurring payback time. A year of medical student, a year. Internship, pay them back a year. And so anyway, I was committed, and it looked like a good way to go, considering our means. So I took my internship at Madigan General Hospital in Tacoma, Washington, and it was a great general internship. And from there, I went on to a general surgical residency at Fitzsimmons General Hospital in Denver, Colorado, and that background, general surgery, and covering all the bases, we would have young surgeons who had only had a year of basic general training and who were ultimately were working in Vietnam. So our residency covered the waterfront when it came from all the subspecialties, urology, cardiology, uh, and orthopedics and thoracic surgery. I got all this terrific training, and what it did was prepared me perfectly for what came to bear. I had orders. I got orders as a captain at Fitzsimmons. I had orders to go to Fort Bragg, South Carolina, and so I sent my family home back to the East Coast for the period of time it would take me to finish up at the at the at the residency program, and then I come in and meet them, drive in from Denver, and drop down to Fort Bragg and start the next phase of my military career. Incidentally, the heart murmur that they picked up in at Walter Reed didn't keep me from getting the reserve commission in the Army when I started this commitment business. Well, as I was finishing up my residency at Fitzsimmons and had orders to Fort Bragg, as I said, I sent my family back east, and I was going to drive in and pick them up and go down to my new assignment. One day, I got called into the chief's office, the chief colonel, who was just macho, steely gray hair parachutist, the chief of surgery, and he called me in and said, "What would you think if I said you weren't going to Fort Bragg?" I said, "Oh, He said, "Well, you're going to Vietnam." I said, "Oh, my goodness." So I had to reverse all those plans. I reversed the trip, and Nancy and two kids came back and stayed in the house in Denver. And one of the caveats was that she was to sell the house while I was gone. But fortunately, we had a place for her to go. But here she is, a young wife with two young kids, and and here I'm gone for almost a year. So it's the old expression: they also serve who sit and wait. But anyway, she did a fantastic job in holding things together as while I was gone. I went from Fitzsimmons out to Fort Riley, Kansas, which is right in our home base here, and we practiced, did some soldiering, and before going over to Vietnam, it came time to go, and we were supposed to leave from San Francisco, but all the riots were going on and everything. So they dropped us off in San Diego, and that we sailed from San Diego, and I'll never forget. On the ship, we sailed out, and there's an infamous place, but that has terrible waves. And it was so funny. We thought, oh boy, we have a 2-week cruise. We'll just relax and have a good time. And the next thing that happened, we got into these breakers where everybody got seasick and we're sick as dogs. But anyway, we survived that and got to China, South China Sea, and we landed, and it was hilarious as I look back on it. I mean, here we are in full battle fatigues and helmets, and I had a gun, and we carrying our army cases. Anyway, we landed, and we got to the area where we were supposed to be setting up, and it hadn't been totally cleared and started building. Well, so we had an encampment. Incidentally, our area for the building of the hospital was cleared with Agent Orange, so a number of our people had subsequent registration for Agent Orange related diseases. But we finally landed, and we were in tents, army cots. The first thing I did was dug a trench over underneath my cot, so in case of an emergency, I could just flip over and fall right into the trench. I don't know that we were ever fired on, but there was a big highway 13 that went down right past our encampment, and some people said there were isolated shots into the compound, but that's not verified. So while our hospital was still being built, an old buddy of mine was stationed at Long Bend, Benoit area, and he was a general surgery resident behind me, 2 years behind me, and he was the brigade surgeon for the 173rd Airborne Brigade, which is just one of the most elite units in the Army. So I went over, and I stayed there, and had a place to stay, a little tent and whatnot. And they got, I occasionally did some work over there. And in fact, one night they brought in some casualties, and one of them had a gunshot. I don't laugh, but it's so unusual, the emotions you apply to situations in danger. So we make the best of it. But anyway, I took a slug out of the shoulder of a guy, and I said, "Here, you want to save this as a souvenir?" And he said, "Hell no, I don't want any souvenir of this." But anyway, that's the way that went. Our hospital finally opened, and it was business. One of our very first days, we had 40 casualties in the emergency room, and stretchers strewn all over the tent. And we finally got organized and got everything built, and we were in buildings that were kind of like the old MASH hospitals, but in the shape of a cross with a central supply area and whatnot. But that's how we did our surgery. The wounded were brought in by medevac, helicopter. The urgent ones, there was no, except for people that are obviously dead when they came in, everybody got it worked on. There was no, treated, I should say. No matter how terrible their wounds were, we treated them. And the expression, or the statistic actually, was that if you make the hospital, you're going to 90+% chance of surviving this war. And our statistics were very good, and we had just top-notch teams of anesthesia and specialists in each field. And I was a general surgeon. There were two other fully qualified surgeons. I was the only one that had formal training and had somewhat of a military background. Bonaparte's, Napoleon's a surgeon, Paret, once said, "No surgeon's training or education is complete without battlefield surgery." And it is so true. And it's so important in the developing the skills, sizing up the situation immediately, and getting to the heart of the problem and hopefully saving a life and a limb. After my tour was coming due, I got interested, or I had been interested in the cardiac aspect of the field of medicine, and in fact was the first medical student to rotate onto an active heart program. My medical school was famous for Charles Bailey, who made the cover of Time magazine for his heart surgery exploits, and so I had that impetus to get involved in cardiac surgery. But anyway, I applied for a residency in cardiac surgery, and sure enough, it turned out that someone who had signed up for the program decided not to go. So it left an opening, which was just incredible, fortunate. But not only did I get the residency, but I got my tour shortened a little bit because the residency program began before my tour in Vietnam was over. So that was thankful. And the reunification with my wife and family. And I can't tell you how important it was to me to the job that my wife held things together while I was gone. 3 kids under 6 by this time. So I got a surgical residency in San Antonio, Texas. And so that was our next travel, our next trip. And I spent 2 years in San Antonio. The military has famous consultants from civilian life come around and have this connection to give speeches and training or have tough cases presented. And the man that was our consultant was the name of Grady Hallman, who was from the Texas Heart Institute, which was the Houston, of course, was very big because of Michael DeBakey. But it's kind of not a very well-known fact that Denton Cooley was really, no question, the top cardiac surgeon in the world. And so I'll never forget, I used to drive him to the airport to pick him up and then take him back. And on one of these car rides, I said, "Grady, what would it take for me to get a fellowship? Get a fellowship over at the Texas Heart Institute?" And Grady said, "Well, your chances be a lot better if you played an instrument." Well, that was right up my alley because I started playing the trombone as a 7th grader and played intermittently throughout the rest of the time. So I told him I played trombone, and the reason that this was important is because Grady headed up a little jazz band made up of cardiac-related specialties in the Army, the surgeons, the anesthesia people, and we had a band. And the band was called the Heartbeats, which was it's it's kind of. But we played at all the little soirees in intermissions of some big shows, including New York City and other places. We were invited to come along and play at intermission. The fellowship at Houston really set me up because it gave me an edge on the other competition. I always believe in getting an edge, and so I got the fellowship, and that was another training related connection that would indent me even more. At one point in the Army, it was 15 years payback time that I owed them for all this training I'd have, but it got me up to good jobs and rank. And the rank comes easy for a surgeon, for a medic. In fact, you came in as a second lieutenant, and 16 years later, I was a full colonel and the head of a surgical, cardiac surgical unit. But from there, I went to San Antonio, which was, as I always say, tough duty, but somebody's got to do it. Uh, I at San Francisco, I was a chief of general surgery, and we had, aside from a fantastic new hospital, and we had a wonderful selection, assortment of cases from tiniest children on up to the oldest retiree. And that was very good and helpful, but by that point I had 16 years in and was getting pretty senior. And I'll never forget, somebody said, well, the only thing you left for you is to go into administration, as in what you become as a chief of general surgery at some hospital like Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or something. Because of the fellowship, and it got me the chiefship at Fitzsimmons General Hospital in Denver, Colorado, and that was second time in Colorado, and at Denver. But it was kind of the beginning, my general surgery residency, and the end, my pre-retirement chiefship, if you will, of a hospital. And then the funny thing was, I didn't know what I was going to do after I got out of the Army. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, that one night at 10:30 in the evening, I got two calls. One was from a compatriot of mine from the Texas Heart Institute, Elias Hanna, from St. Mary's in San Francisco. He wanted me to come out and join him in his practice. His practice had developed to the point he needed more help. The very same night, Dr. Bill Reed, who's well known around Kansas City, called me up and said, we have a going practice, and we would be interested in whether you would see if you would be interested in joining our practice. So I said, well, how about if you come over here? And I paid him a consultant fee to come over and interview me for a job as a cardiac surgeon. So he came over, and I put on, they weren't easy cases I put on for him, but I did well. And I used to have I used to do a lot of running, and so I had a picture in my office of a runner exhausted, and he's leaning forward, just gasping, and it was a testimonial to the endurance of the marathon runner. And he later told me, he said, I knew you had the stamina to hang in there with our practice, and that worked out very well also. So I got the job at St. Luke's, the Mid-America Heart Institute, and I worked there from 79, which is the year I retired from the Army, till 87. And then I retired from practice completely. So it's been a great ride, as they say. So